Hi there. Today we are going to talk a little bit about plotting. We've talked about settings, we've talked about characters. Now we're going to try to put all of that together. So, what I typically do when I'm establishing a plot is I look to plot a story arc for each individual character, not just my protagonist or my antagonist. I also do the love interest, the best friend, the antagonist's minions. Every single person gets a story progression based on their individual motivations and goals. So I think doing that adds a little bit more flavor, realizing that, there's more than just the one story going on here. Each individual character has their own storyline, their own adventure, their own plot. So I think whenever I go through and I do that, it adds additional character development and flavor, let's say, to the story rather than it just being focused on, one or two people. It kind of gives it a more well-rounded, just a more real feel to it. I think so. So when you're starting to plot out these character arcs, one of the first things you want to consider in your Act 1. So basically, I write Act 1, 2, and 3. And in this session, we're going to talk about Act 1 because it's one of the most important parts of the book. This is your opportunity to you want your reader to absolutely fall in love with your protagonist or absolutely hate your antagonist. Either one. You want to develop some kind of an emotional connection to characters or the story. You also have what's called your inciting incident. Your inciting incident is kind of your hook. It's the reason for the entire story. And without it, the story gets pretty boring pretty quickly. So it's something that you really need to consider as a writer is your inciting incident. So that's the incident that's the most impactful moment for the protagonist that kind of propels that character forward into the story, gives them purpose, the reason why the story is being told. So basically, what's the catalyst for that? I'm going to take, for example, in my Ruin Master saga, Dusk, the inciting incident is that her mother is murdered and she comes home to find her and the murderer is in the apartment. This is the catalyst for Mira that sends her on the entire story, her whole discovery, and kind of her purpose. She's discovering a lot of new things about herself and kind of deciding what she wants to do with this new information that she's receiving. But the inciting incident is the murder of her mother. And it kind of pushes that story forward. It also kind of makes you sympathize with this character who has kind of lost the only person that she has, the only loved one in her life. So it also kind of pulls at the heartstrings there. Now, a lot of people are like, well, where do I begin? Where do I start the story? So you don't want to start right off the bat with your inciting incident. You kind of want to introduce your characters and your setting in the beginning, but you don't want to spend too much time doing that, and you don't want to just dump a bunch of information. So usually, wherever your inciting incident is in time, rewind a little bit before that. So what was Mira doing prior to finding her mother murdered? Well, she was at work, so I kind of started it with her shift at work, and then coming home to find her mother. But it gives you an opportunity to I set the timeline, it's in, the 1940s, so I got to set a little bit of the setting. She had some interaction with her coworkers, so you can tell that she's an endearing character, kind of very sweet, a little naive, and then to have all this thrust upon her with the inciting incident. So that's kind of where you decide where you're going to start. So pick out that important piece, rewind a little bit, build up to it. Once you have your inciting incident, another thing you want to consider to include in that is, your character having second thoughts. Mira is scared, obviously, for a lot of different reasons. Her mother was just murdered. She's very confused. She can have second thoughts about what she wants to do, what her course of action is. So, you know, kind of that decision making process that your main character makes before actually heading down the path of the story. I think most people have a decision making process that they go through when faced with an obstacle rather than just plunging head first. So I think it makes it more interesting if you kind of establish that mental battle in their head about whether or not they want to move forward or what they want to do about this. It gives it an interesting human perspective. And then there's the climax of the first act, which is they make the final decision. This is what I'm going to do. And they move forward into the story. That's kind of the character's all-in moment. Like, here we go. We're full-fledged story at this time. And you can write from there into Act 2. Now, Act 1 is relatively short. It's about 10% of your book. So if you have a target word count, you have a pretty good idea of where that stands as far as word count in your book. You also want to make sure that you hit that inciting incident probably within the first 20 to 30 pages. Reason why is you want to make sure that you hook the reader. So if you make them read too far before actually getting to the purpose of the story, sometimes they'll close the book and decide they don't want to hear anymore, or they don't want to read anymore, I should say. A couple other things to consider in the beginning. I know it's hard to start a book. There are some faux pas that a lot of traditional publishers will say to stay away from them. You know, things like starting in a dream sequence where you are, kind of fooling the reader that this is the story. Oh, wait, no, it's not. Readers tend not to like that. Publishers tend not to like that. So that's usually something to stay away from. Some advice that I've heard is drop me straight into the action. My new Titan Code book, the opening scene, which I'm still ironing it out because I want it to be just perfect, basically is one of the characters waking up from an explosion. So he's knocked out, he's unconscious. So I'm trying to think, if you were knocked out from an explosion, what senses would wake up first? Would I hurt? Would it be my feeling? Would I open my eyes first? Would my ears be ringing? The taste of, blood in my mouth? What would so I have actually talked to a few military veterans to kind of, that have been in that scenario that, okay, well, what was this experience like for you? And I'm still kind of ironing that out. But I think if I could get that really good and solid, I think that's a great opening. Definitely some action. The reader's immediately like, whoa, this guy just, he was in this massive explosion. I want to read more. I want to know what happens. So there's an idea there. I start another book that's, a chase, chasing a thief. Just drop it into some action is a good way to do it. Trying to think of, definitely don't do the dream sequence, drop it into some action, and make sure you get to that inciting incident pretty quickly. So that's about all I have from now on Act 1. Tune in next time for Act 2.